Welcome to Becoming Invaluable podcast with myself, Terry Lyles, and Stephen Bowen, who is the co-author with me, or I'm the co-author with him. I don't know. We go back and forth. I don't really know, but we did a book and we're here. So Steve, welcome. We have a guest with us, but thank you, Steve. And you're going to introduce the guest next. So thank you for being here with us.
Yes. Well, and I just want to say it's Dr. Terry Lyles. He is a psychologist, and we work really great together, and I really appreciated, Terry, our interaction. And it is my pleasure today to introduce retired Major General Gronski, and welcome to the show. We are thrilled to have you on.
Hey, Steve and Terry, I am delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation to be a guest on your podcast.
Yeah. Well, John, I got to know you through another very, very good friend of mine, Bill Forrester, and I'm so glad he introduced us. We've had a number of conversations, and we always seem to have a lot of fun with it, so I'm sure we will today as well. I just want to tell everybody out there, first of all, what Major General means is two-star general, and for those of you that might not be as familiar with the military rankings, and John has one of the most interesting stories I think I've ever heard from a military career standpoint, because it's not just been military. It's his family history. It's his family business. It's his military history, which was kind of done twice over in a way, in a certain way. John, I'll let you expound upon this a little bit, because I think it's one of the more unique stories I've ever heard from a career general.
Hey, Steve, thank you. Yeah, I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, family business, as you mentioned. My father was a World War II vet. Started a garage and towing service and car lot. And as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, I grew up in the business, at first sweeping the floors and then eventually towing cars and everything else associated with that business. And then I got my commission in the Army in 1978, University of Scranton ROTC program, served 4 years on active duty. Left active duty, went into the Pennsylvania National Guard, and then from that point on, I had a 40-year career. Ended up having about 12, 13 years on active duty, a combat deployment to Iraq, where I commanded a brigade there in Ramadi in 05 and 06, a very dangerous and violent time. Led 5,000 soldiers and Marines there. And spent the last 3 years of my military career on active duty as one of the deputy commanding generals at U.S. Army Europe. So I traveled to at least 40 European countries on business while I was over there, including Ukraine. As a matter of fact, still have a great deal of relationships in Europe. I'll be going back to Lithuania next week to work with the Lithuanian military as they conduct a one-week leadership symposium. So my career was fantastic. One thing you didn't mention, Steve, is in 1983, as a 20-something-year-old, me and my wife and I bicycled across the United States from Washington State to Pennsylvania with our 15-month-old son. So we spent 3 months on a bicycle trip with our 15-month-old. And that was an exciting experience, and one where I also learned a great deal of leadership lessons.
Yeah, I remember that story. And I'd say, so what was the purpose? We're talking about purpose and value, so I'm a little intrigued. I'm like, okay, so you didn't have to do that. I'm sure you probably had an automobile somewhere in your house. So that'll be interesting to hear. And it's part of the book. You're on page 65. There it is. So there's the book, and it's brand new release. We're very excited that it's out, and your story is on page 65. So all of our 9 people that we interviewed, they have a page number. So Steve, with that, as we talk about, this purpose and values piece, John, you fit into it. That's why we invited you to be a part of that chapter.
Yeah, well, I would love to hear that story about how does that tie to how you help find your own purpose in life, because I think leadership and individuality are two things that are somewhat married together here.
Yeah, so to get back to that bike story just for a moment, when I was 20 years old, it was 1976, I heard about people bicycling across the nation. It was called the Bike Centennial Route. And it just enthralled me when I was 20. And a few years later, when I was leaving active duty at Fort Lewis, Washington, in the state of Washington, I said to my wife, "Hey, we're going to be moving back to Pennsylvania. How about if we fulfill this dream that I've had to bicycle across the country?" And so my purpose was one of adventure, and we, figured, hey, our son is part of our family. Let's just do this together. And obviously we were well prepared in many different ways, and we added to the purpose by raising money for the Boys and Girls Club. So it was a part of seizing that adventure, and then it was a part of also trying to give back to an organization, the Boys and Girls Club, where when I was a youth growing up in northeastern Pennsylvania, that was a big part of my life. So I was happy to include them in that purpose.
That's
Well,
awesome.
John, I recall that now from our discussions before, and one of the interesting things tied to that is the other day, my wife is very involved here in our small town in Duxbury, Massachusetts, in the Duxbury Student Union, which is really for children after school, and it's all about leadership. And what's so interesting about that is the gentleman that is now the chairman of the board for that organization comes from the Boys and Girls Club right here in southeastern Massachusetts, out of Brockton, Massachusetts. And I don't know how you think of it, but when I think of people, I think of there's no better place to invest than in our children. And I said to the group, I said, well, we're all proud of our children. I think what I've learned the last 3.5 years is I'm even more proud of my grandchildren. and and I said, so I can't imagine a better thing to invest in than the children in our community. And so that's really interesting that in a way, this whole leadership journey after your first commission in the military probably started with this whole aspect of thinking about children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It was because of my experience having great mentors in my life at the Boys Club, where I wanted to give back.
Awesome. Well, John, as you think about purpose and advance us forward now, maybe on through as you move back to the military from your family business, where did that fit for you individually? And then maybe you can give us a few insights into how that fit for you as you took on leadership roles, more and more important ones.
Yeah, a lot of times, Steve, people ask me, why did you join the Army? And the reason I joined the Army was to get out of my small town. I wanted to see the world. My town I grew up in, 5,000 people. I just wanted to see more than that. So that's what got me into the Army. What kept me in the Army was purpose. Because after I got into the Army, actually purpose and values kept me in, because we have shared values in the Army. We have our Army values of loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Those values were important to me because my father taught me many of those values as well. Mm-hmm. And then the purpose of doing something with your life that is greater than yourself. And of course, in the Army, we take an oath to the Constitution. We defend our country. And that's what really kept me in. If I may, when I left the Army after 40 years of service in 2019, I really struggled then with what is my purpose now. And I had to go on an introspective journey, and I arrived that my purpose as a 60-some-year-old after leaving the Army was to help leaders who want to improve become better leaders. And I seized on that purpose, and that's why I wrote that book, Iron Sharpened Leadership, and that's why I continue to go around not only this country, but around the world, speaking to leaders and conducting leadership seminars and trying to help leaders who want to become better leaders improve. And that's what my purpose is now.
And Steve and I talked about this, Steve, as you remember writing this book, was, there's life after life, like you live your life, and then, you retire or change job or whatever. How do you recreate a new purpose? So that was part of this book, was that purpose can be cyclical. You could have a purpose up to a point, you fulfill that, but then what? You've got to create something new. So I think we're writing and talking to a lot of people that are going through transitions, whether they're moving from one place to the other, marriage, divorce, children, grandchildren, retiring. So I think you just spoke to part of that, which I think in that chapter is very important, because that's why we wanted to interview you in that chapter, is because people just like yourself have a very successful career, and then what? Because if you don't replace that purpose with a new purpose, life seems to shorten for most people.
And Terry, you bring up an interesting point. And a mentor of mine, retired 3-star General Hodges, he addressed it this way. He said it's like it's like a football team going into halftime. And they've got to adapt to how the first half went. And I think as we go through different transitions in our life, that's the best way of thinking about it. It's not like game is over. It's like, hey, this is halftime. This is a transition. Now we have to adapt and figure out how are we going to move on with the next phase of our life based on what we learned, and to do it even more successfully.
I love the halftime analogy, because that means we're going to live to be 120, all three of us or so. So that's awesome. Love that.
Let's work on that.
Well, it's also, there was a pretty popular book, I'm going to say 10, 15 years ago, that was called Halftime. Yes. It was a very interesting book. I cannot remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it makes me think also, John, I think you've actually written 2 books. You mentioned one, Iron Sharpened Leadership. What was the other book?
Well, the other book is titled The Ride of Our Lives, and that was about that bicycle trip I took in 1983. And by the way, I wrote that book about 30-some years after the trip, because I wrote that book, The Ride of Our Lives, about that bicycle trip after I retired from the Army in 2019. But I had a journal that sat in a shoebox for over 30 years, and I used that journal to reconstruct the memories of that bike trip. And there's a lot of leadership lessons in that book, The Ride of Our Lives, just like there is in my leadership book that I wrote.
That's great.
Well, I think, as I think about it, I happen to be a enthusiast around cycling myself. I don't get to ride much anymore. I now am indoor and that kind of stuff, and electric bikes, but that's okay. I'm still staying active and moving. I've never done, whatever, 3,000 or 4,000 miles in 30 days or 90 days or, anything like that. But I've done a couple of 100 miles in a couple of days. And it's interesting as you think about purpose. I think sometimes people wonder, how does something like that, physical activity and exercise, align with helping you achieve your purpose? I'm just curious, how do you look at that?
Yeah, I look at it as fitness, and this is how I define fitness. It's about physical fitness. So that's, the food you eat, the physical activity, the sleep you get, the hydration, those things. But then it's also about mental fitness, which means you have to spend time reading, listening to podcasts, doing, bringing good things into your mind. Good input equals good output. So that's what mental fitness is about. It's about emotional fitness, which means developing your emotional intelligence and working on those aspects of emotional intelligence. And then there's spiritual fitness. And spiritual fitness really is all about knowing that there's something larger going on in our life, something larger going on in the universe than just ourselves. And it could be a formal religion or something else. But I think it's like the solar plexus in the middle of your chest. All those elements of fitness come together, which help us better understand our purpose and better implement the purpose that we've developed for ourselves. So I think it's all of those elements of fitness that help us achieve our purpose.
That's great, because that's what we have in the book, is who we are mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. So you did a great job of outlining what's in the book. So and that's great, because that's really what I think all three of us on this podcast know and believe in our life history is. It's not just one or two things. As I say, you got 4 of those elements. They're like 4 wheels on the same car. It only takes one flat to have a bad day. You don't need 4 flats. You can have a mental flat, an emotional flat, a spiritual flat, a physical flat, and you still got to pull off and repair. So it's very important coming from, a general to say, hey, mind those 4 flats and before they happen. Exactly. So Steve, let's wrap up with any final thoughts you have. So it was awesome.
I would like to ask one more question, Terry, before we do the wrap.
Absolutely.
So, John, purpose is so critical, right? Having a real purpose in life. The second thing that seems very critical is the values that surround that purpose. And we tend to refer to that as alignment. when you think of those values around your purpose, how do you verbalize that?
Right. That is a great question. And Steve, as a CEO of a large company, that most corporations have corporate values, and you would think that the senior leadership team at any corporation factors those corporate values into the business decisions they make. At least you would hope to think that, right? But the same thing goes for us personally. And a lot of times when I'm doing these leadership workshops, I ask people, have you ever thought long and hard about what your personal core values are? And if somebody asks you, what's your personal core values, could you rattle off those 3 to 5? And my 3 to 5 are service, integrity, and respect. And it's important that people really go on that journey to figure out what their personal core values are, because if you're going to make a personal decision in your life, shouldn't you factor in your personal core values? And how could you do that if you don't really know what your personal core values are? That's one. The second thing is, when you understand what, when your back is against the wall, you're going to adhere to these values no matter what. That keeps us on the right path. And that really keeps us on the path to achieving our purpose when we truly understand what we're going to stand for, not only in good times, but also in challenging times.
Well, John, I don't think Terry and I could have said it better ourselves, for sure. It's a big part of what we address in the book. It's really important. And when it becomes so important, it's like Terry's previous book that you see there in the background, Performance Under Pressure. It's when people are under pressure, they can make a values decision mistake. And it's when it's most critical. And you have to turn yourself inward a little bit to assess this from that kind of perspective, and make sure that your purpose and values are in full alignment with the decision that you're making. And so it's just it's a wonderful toolbox to have, and that's part of it. And the book goes much further. We go into visualization, we go into mission, which we define kind of in the military perspective, John, of our mission is telling people that define what hill must you take? What's the next 12 months? What must you accomplish in those next 12 months to continue to achieve your vision that's aligned with your purpose and values? And so this is so much a part of why we are so thrilled to have you not only on the show here, we're also thrilled to have you have participated in the book. And we appreciate, your support and all that you've done to help us out in other ways too. So thank you for that. And Terry, I think what I would just like to say in one sentence is this to all of our listeners: purpose and values can never be underestimated. Never.
Yes. Yeah, it's the foundation and the bedrock, as you mentioned, General, that, that's what our foundation is. You have to stand on a rock, or you're standing in sand, and sand shifts with a lot of different instabilities. So again, there's the new book. We're talking about chapter 3, the purpose and values piece, which John is in, page 65. So go there and you can check him out. You can find us on becominginvaluable.com, just like the cover of the book. John, how do people find you if they want to see something about you?
Yeah, they could go to my website, johngronski.com. Very simple. Or, they could Google me, but go to my website. That's probably the best. I'm on, LinkedIn and Facebook and all those other social media sites, but my website's probably the best place.
Great. Okay, great. Now we look forward to hearing more from you. Excited about, your story and your journey. And Steve, John, thank you for being a part of Becoming Invaluable podcast. We're going to do it again with some others. You were one of our top, so we started with you because, we wanted to share your story. So thank you for your service to our country and to your contribution to our book. So becominginvaluable.com. Steve, thank you. John, thank you. And we will talk to you soon.